Hello friends, welcome to UGC EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Satya Raj from Discipline of Geography, School of Sciences, Indira Gandhi National Open University, Delhi, speaking on behalf of Dr. Jayanand from Noida International University, Greater Noida, Uttar Pradesh, who has contributed to this unit. Today I am going to elaborate upon climate change, gender and human health, which comes under the paper Climatology. First of all, let us discuss what could be the learning outcomes of this module. While going through this module, you should be able to explain about the changing climate around the globe, state the impact of climate change on human health, distinguish between direct and indirect effects of climate change, describe the influence of changing climate on different sections of society, and summarize the impact of climate change on human psychological developments. You have already studied about climate change and its evidences and causes in the previous modules of this course. You have also learnt about the role of human beings as being a major agent of this climate change. The present module deals with the changing climatic conditions around the globe and its impact on human health. The learners will get an outlook about the effects of climate change on different sections of society with special emphasis on developing countries. They will also get acquainted with direct and indirect impacts of climate change and their role in modulating the mortality and morbidity among the population. Insights will be developed regarding the impacts of climate change on mental health and well-being. Now, climate change and human health. In the blitz radiance of rapidly blooming economy and scientific and technological advancement, their impact on nature and environment has been usually overlooked. This has caused severe damage to the human beings who have been sustaining the change in climatic conditions over the earth in the form of shrunken glaciers, frequent flood incidences, drought, cyclones, increased global temperature, changes in precipitation patterns, rise in sea levels, etc. These changes in climatic conditions sabotage the access to safe water, inadequate food, clean air, shelter and security. As per report of World Health Organization (WHO), 12.6 million lives are compromised each year by preventable ecological risk factors. The report further ascertained that climate change is expected to cause approximately 250,000 additional casualties per year due to malnutrition, malaria, diarrhea and heart strokes between the year 2030 to 2050. Having an idea about the effects of climate change on human health, we are now in a position to categorize them under different sections like its direct and indirect impacts as discussed in the coming sections. Now, the direct impacts of climate change depend mainly on exposure of heat or cold waves or extreme weather events and their subsequent influences on human health in the form of various heat and cold related illness and sometimes death. Now, under this comes the temperature related deaths and illness. The daily morbidity and mortality has been shown to have a direct association with the extreme outdoor temperature, especially in the temperate and subtropical countries. Morbidity is a state of disease, disabled or poor health conditions, while mortality rate may be defined as a measure of the number of deaths in a given population. Nevertheless, we can easily comprehend that the rate of mortality ascends much more steeply with rising temperatures than with falling temperatures. Both morbidity and mortality could also increase in different regions of the world as a result of the expected increase in the number of days with high daily temperatures. The impacts would be exacerbated by high humidity, intense solar radiation and frail winds. All of these factors affect the psychological mechanisms of human adaptations for the better survival and ultimately lead to poor living conditions. These conditions are magnified with the people of low income group as they have lesser capability to cope with it. Though there is impact of increasing temperatures to everyone, the most vulnerable ones are the poor. Now comes the pollution. Pollution, especially air pollution, is yet again the most conversed environmental concerns of our times. Here, however, we would try to study its vicious impacts on human health. Elevated amount of air pollutants, especially particulate matter, operate synergistically to influence mortality rate of a population, especially in big urban cities like Mexico City, Santiago, Chile, and where such conditions enhances the formation of secondary pollutants also. People inhabiting urban and industrial areas are predominantly prone to various diseases and ailments due to a variety of air pollutants, which include sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, ozone, volatile organic compounds, etc. Now let us study the harmful effects of different pollutants on human health separately. Sulfur dioxide. Individuals persistently in contact with sulfur dioxide have elevated prevalence of cold, cough, fatigue, shortness of breath and bronchitis. A large portion of atmospheric sulfur dioxide is transformed to sulfate salts, which either settle down and contribute to acid rain in the form of sulfuric acid or react with rainwater. Exposure to 0.4 parts per million of sulfur dioxide or more results in asthmatics even after 5 minutes of long exposure. Children are especially more susceptible to cough even with intermittent exposure to 1 parts per million of sulfur dioxide. Now nitrogen dioxide. Similarly, high levels of nitrogen dioxide render human vulnerable to acute respiratory disorders like bronchitis, chronic fibrosis, emphysema and bronchopneumonia and lead to decline in optimum pulmonary operations. An elevation of 20% respiratory tract related maladies have been reported as a consequence of the increase in 30 micrograms per meter cube in NO2 levels. Carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide is particularly lethal by the virtue of its tendency to competitively bind to hemoglobin with higher affinity in the red blood corpuscles, resulting in the formation of carboxyhemoglobin, thereby preventing the binding of oxygen and oxyhemoglobin in normal conditions. Acute decrement in lung functions have been associated with high dose exposure of carbon monoxide. About 5% carbon monoxide exposure causes cardiovascular effect in young, healthy, non-smoking individuals, leading to fatigue and reduced ability to work. It may also lead to cardiac strokes, hypertension, etc. Substantial evidences have suggested strong correlation between carbon monoxide exposures and consequent decline in birth weight, cardiomegaly, impediment in behavioral development, interference in the development of normal cognitive functions, and an incline in even infant death syndrome. Suspended particulate matter (SPM). Further, suspended particulate matter may also get deposited on the skin and lead to skin related maladies such as rashes, skin infections, blockages of pores, etc. However, certain groups of particles pass into the respiratory tract through inhalation. The symptoms are often recorded as stuffy or running nose, sinusitis, sore throat, wet cough, head cold, hay fever, burning or red eyes, etc. Chronic exposure to such particles leads to asthma and several lung related diseases. Now ozone. The level of ozone in atmosphere is especially rising in urban areas, and it is responsible for the onset of serious human and health conditions such as irritation in eyes, nose and throat, discomfort in respiration, cough and headache. Ozone irritates the epithelial lining of pulmonary organs. Exposure to even 1 to 3 hours of ozone at a concentration ranging between 253 to 340 micrograms per meter cube may result in acute reversible impairment of lungs functioning and enhanced respiratory disease symptoms. However, prolonged exposure leads to grave pulmonary inflammations, besides increasing the susceptibility of lungs towards an assortment of bacterial infections and compounding the severity of influenza infection. Now, benzene. Benzene is a hazardous air pollutant which accelerates the generation of carcinogenicity, that is the cancer causing ability in the system, and is associated with several genetic aberrations and chromosomal anomalies. People may suffer from euphoria followed by dizziness, erratic behavior, erratic breathing rate, headache, nausea and unconsciousness by long duration of exposure to even minor concentrations of benzene. Now, volatile compounds. The volatile compounds have tremendous impending carcinogenic effects on human beings and are suitably termed as air toxins. They react with oxides of nitrogen in the presence of sunlight and generate photochemical smog. We have heard of this smog being an awfully dense haze that hampers the visibility in the region. These vision obscuring fumes cause irritation to eyes and lungs, besides damaging the plant life. Now, lead particles. They may enter the human body system through inhalation or ingestion with contaminated food or water. Lead is a dangerous environmental pollutant and has adverse effects on practically every system in human body. It can damage the kidneys, the nervous system, the reproductive system and cause high blood pressure. Children are more prone to lead pollutant due to high absorption rate than adults. It affects the brain of fetuses and young children, resulting in the lack of intelligence, neurological problems, behavioral problems, etc. Chronic exposure with elevated blood lead levels is associated with hypertension, headache, confusion, irritability, etc. Now, figure 1 clearly exhibits the sum of the pollutants and their negative impacts on several organs of the body and overall on human health. Now comes the indirect impacts of climate on human health. Let us get acquainted with this. These are in the form of diseases such as infectious diseases, vector and water-borne diseases and algal blooms. Infectious diseases and parasitic diseases are the prime cause of high morbidity in adults and mortality among children since the ancient times. Some infectious diseases are more common in tropical and subtropical areas than in temperate or cold areas. Majority of them are food, water-borne infections. Viral, bacterial and protozoan agents in diarrhea can survive in warm water for long duration of time and thus spread at increased rates in rainy seasons in the tropical and subtropical climates. Diseases like dengue, chikungunya fever, parasitic infections like leishmaniasis, lymphatic filariasis and tick-borne diseases, etc. are all vector-borne diseases. The distribution of dengue and chikungunya arboviruses are also influenced by climate as both share a mutual vector, Aedes aegypti. Malaria is another vector-borne disease spread by several species of female Anopheles mosquitoes whose population is majorly affected by temperature, surface water and humidity. Climatic factors have also influenced human plague, a kind of bacterial disease having rodents as disease carrier and fleas as transmittance agents. Temperature and rainfall are the two key determining factors having effects on survival and growth of rodent and flea population. Another disease showing similar climatic sensitivity is murine typhus, a rickettsial disease also transmitted by fleas. All the infective agents mentioned above and vectors are sensitive to environmental changes, especially those nurtured by their respective optimum temperatures and humidity. Vectors are also vulnerable to air streams, soil moisture, surface water and variation in vegetation and forest distribution. All these environmental components influence the population distribution of vectors along with geographical locations as well as their behavioral pattern. Now comes the water-borne diseases. Hot and humid climatic conditions bestows upon the water pathogens to thrive and proliferate at rapid rate, thereby making the water-borne disease recurrent. The list of such diseases ranges from cholera to different forms of diarrhea. Diarrheal diseases constitute 1/4 of total childhood fatality and thus are really the more foremost cause of morbidity and mortality in South Asia. With the rising temperatures, the time period of bacterial survival and propagation is expected to rise, thereby leading to a direct elevation in the incidence of diarrheal diseases. Rapid urbanization, industrialization, population explosion, inefficient water use and lethargic and apathetic attitude of people towards water conservation are already causing water shortages. Several countries around the world are facing this. The situation of dearth of fresh water resources is aggravated by continually deteriorating average annual rainfall, and with each passing year there is a direct consequence of climate change in many areas. Consequently, people are left with limited choices of using comparatively contaminated and unsafe water, which is all the more dangerous. The situation is worsened in the monsoons when floods occur and presents plenty of such contaminated water sources for breeding and spread of numerous waterborne diseases. Now, algal blooms. Algal blooming may also be associated with contamination of aquatic creatures including fish and shellfish. With the continually warming ocean, temperature sensitive toxins are produced by phytoplanktons that contaminates the seafood, resulting in an increased frequency of food poisoning in humans in the coastal areas. The climate induced changes in terms of production of aquatic pathogens and biotoxins may also jeopardize seafood safety. Now refer to figure 2 to get a brief idea of the impact of climate change on human health. Now, differential impacts of climate change on different sections of the society. So far we have discussed the direct and indirect consequences of climate change on human. In this section we shall try to identify how climate change influences different sections of society. Now, gender wise, in this regard it is worth to mention that gender plays a crucial role in deciding an individual's vulnerability. Like women are more likely to be adversely affected by climate change than men. Their vulnerability is further increased due to the fact that their social and economic status counts, which limits their ability to adapt to altering climatic conditions. Besides, pregnant women are in particular more prone to malaria than non-pregnant women. The condition renders pregnant ladies to be more alluring to malaria carrying mosquitoes, making them particularly vulnerable to malaria. Women in advanced stage of pregnancy, that is more than 28 weeks, exhale more than 21% of the average volume as compared to the non-pregnant ladies. This also increases the blood flow through their skin, which leads to greater heat dissipation to their epithelial surface, especially in their hands and feet. So, there is an increased risk of malaria during pregnancy, and it leads to serious threats of spontaneous abortion, premature delivery, stillbirth and low birth weight. Floods and waterlogging in other impacts of climate change that has given rise to differential health effects in women and men in flood affected regions. Women are compelled to stay in close proximity to the community and drink unhygienic water. Pregnant women face additional difficulty with locomotion whose locomotion is marooned in slippery conditions and thus are often advised to stay at home. Nevertheless, the nutritious nutritional status determines the capability of an individual to cope with the aftermath of natural disasters. Girls and women with relatively poor nutritional status often suffer from increased prevalence of anemia, pregnancy and parturition, which is the process of delivering the baby, and related complications in these. Now, age wise, the effects of climate change seems to be more pronounced on children and aged population as compared to adults. Children have to contend with the immediate and life-threatening dangers of climate-related disasters, food insecurity, rising air pollution, increased risk of vector-borne diseases, acute respiratory infections, diarrheal diseases and malnutrition. Evidence is increasingly showing that these risks can have a markedly detrimental impact on the child's early development. In 2015, malaria is estimated to lead to 4,38,000 deaths, of which more than two-thirds are children under the 5 years of age. Like children, elderly population are also vulnerable to the risks and challenges posed by changing climate around the globe. With the increasing biological age, people have to confront several challenges including declining physical and mental well-being, higher risk of health-related disabilities, loss of financial stability and security, and ultimately sudden or their painful demise. Now, social and economic status wise, climate change compounds the miseries of people with low income and social status. The adverse impact of varying environmental conditions are prominent in developing nations due to their geographical location and native climatic conditions. Their high dependence on natural resources and their limited capability to adapt to the changing climate makes the situation worse. Alterations in both temperature and rate and amount of precipitation vary from region to region, affecting higher and lower latitudes differently. This would change the frequency of natural disasters such as floods and droughts, which may adversely affect the agricultural production, fisheries, marine life, water resource availability, industry and human health. All these are expected to increase the disparity in wealth between the developed and developing nations. The effects are perceptible not only in terms of disparity in wealth, but also in relation to health and survival of two groups of population in the absence of effective and well implemented policies of protection. The coastal flooding could also grow tenfolds or more by 2080s and affect more than 100 million people per year due to sea level rise alone. Pollution has its own role in aggravating the hardships and misery of poor. In the eastern parts of India and Bangladesh, having predominantly higher arsenic contamination in groundwater, inundations resulting from severe downpour or oceanic calamity compounds the trials and tribulations of especially socially economically deprived sections of the society. Arsenic poisoning has also been observed to be drastically impacting the educational and nutritional status of the members of these groups. Physiologically, arsenic toxicities are reflected in the form of skin-related maladies like lesions, hardening, dark spots on the hands and feet, swollen limbs and loss of sensation. Now, let us study the impact of climate on mental well-being, mental health and well-being. The effects of climate is related and its related environmental consequences are not only confined to the physical health but also affect mental health and psychological well-being of the population. To start with, let us know that global warming has led to an unprecedented increase in optimal universal temperatures, a trend that is likely to continue. This rise in global temperature has been associated with increasing aggressiveness and violence among the people. A direct relation between higher incidences of criminal activities in summers substantiates the above statement. This aggressive behavior and aggressive mentality often leads to several suicide attempts, the counts of which have been found to soar in the hot summers, indicating a relationship between the violent activities with the recent rise in mercury. Heat waves have also been linked with anomalous behavior and responses. An Australian study reported the complementary effects of heat waves in increased prevalence of mental disorders in conjunction with other psychological ailments including cardiovascular, hepatic and renal illness, etc. Different mood disorders, anxiety disorders, dementia, etc. are common cerebral limited consequences of heat waves. Occupational heat exposure, that is, prolonged contact with elevated temperatures at workplace, adversely affects the worker's cerebral consistency and causes several mental stress. Besides, certain environmental calamities have their own roles in causing stress, like disasters like flood, cyclones, hurricanes, bushfires often leave traumatic. People subjected to extreme weather events often develop serious post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD), the symptom of which encompasses regular disturbing flashbacks of the calamity, etc. Drought is another major consequence of climate change whose frequency of occurrence is expected to rise in the near future. With aberrant patterns of precipitation and soaring temperatures, droughts are already showing their grave corollaries in the form of severe water scarcity, drop in groundwater levels, extreme weather conditions and many others. All these unanimously result in awful agricultural losses in terms of crop productivity, which leads to increased distress to the farmers. Recently, there has been increased incidences of farmer suicides also due to this. Such events have been observed in the developed as well as developing nations like India. Psychosomatic anxieties are thus amplified subsequent to disasters, especially for the families who are completely dislocated from their native settlements and forced to stay in camps. Complete breakdown of normal daily routines along with excessive congestion at those emergency camps, lack of privacy adds up to the already existing traumatic situation. The women and children again forms the most vulnerable groups in this. Now let us recapitulate what we have learned so far in this module. Extreme environmental conditions including floods, droughts, forest fires and tropical cyclones are becoming more prominent these days. Changing climatic conditions around the globe have remarkable impact on human health. The impacts of climate change on human being could be grouped into two, direct and indirect effects. The direct impact of climate change are probably due to the exposure of heat and cold waves or extreme weather events, which are basically temperature and humidity related changes in climate. Air pollution in the form of rise of certain greenhouse gases like SO2, NO2, CO, lead, benzene, SPM in air also directly impact the human health. Indirect impacts of climate change on human health are due to certain infectious diseases, vector-borne and water-borne diseases. Algal blooms are the rapid growth of algae that can cause harm to animals, human or the local ecology. Climate change influences the different sections of society in terms of gender, age, socio-economic conditions of people, etc. Women are more likely to be affected by the adversity. Women are more likely to be affected by the adverse climatic conditions. The effects of climate change seem to be more pronounced on children and aged population as compared to adults. Climate change compounds the miseries of people with low income and social status. The effects of climate change and its relative environmental consequences are not only confined to the physical health but also affect the mental health and psychological well-being of the population. Thank you very much.